Smokeless chimney, 10 states and 1 agency sue the EPA. A commentary. The best flames on the net. Disclaimer. I am not an attorney. I've never taken law courses, and I am not your counsel. I am an expert and have been in court and approved by the judge to be an expert. To be an expert in the eyes of the court, you must be more knowledgeable than 50% of the population on the specific subject matter. Regarding the 10 states suing the EPA, in summary, this is a legal complaint filed by the U.S. states and the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency against the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and its administrator, Michael Regan. The complaint revolves around the EPA's failure to review and revise the New Source Performance Standard, NSPS, for particulate matter pollution from new residential wood heaters as mandated by the Clean Air Act. The complaints argue that wood smoke contains harmful pollutants, including fine particulate matter linked to adverse health effects. The EPA's existing standards have not been updated since 2015. The complaint highlights deficiencies in the EPA's wood heater testing and certification program, indicating the need for updated and more effective new source performance standards. The states and the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency request that the court to declare the EPA's violation of the Clean Air Act and join the EPA to promptly review and propose necessary revisions to the new source performance standard for residential wood heaters and seek other appropriate relief. Do the plaintiffs have a good argument? I can provide an analysis of the plaintiff's argument based on the information presented in the complaint. The plaintiffs are arguing that the EPA has failed to fulfill its legal obligation as outlined in the Clean Air Act to review and revise the New Source Performance Standard, or NSPS, for particulate matter pollution from residential wood heaters. They contend that wood smoke contains harmful pollutants that are detrimental to public health, and that the existing standards last updated in 2015 are outdated and ineffective. Additionally, the complaint raises concerns about deficiencies in the EPA's wood heater testing and certification program, suggesting that the standards in place are not adequately ensuring compliance and reducing harmful emissions. Whether the plaintiffs have a good argument or not will ultimately be determined through legal proceedings. The court will evaluate the evidence, legal interpretations, and relevant laws to make a decision. The outcome will depend on the strengths of the legal arguments presented by both parties, adherence to legal requirements, and the interpretation of the Clean Air Act related regulations. Regarding the 10 states suing, based on the information provided on the filing, the most significant merits of the plaintiff's case are as follows. 1. A violation of the Clean Air Act. The plaintiffs argue that the EPA's failure to review and revise the new source performance standards for residential wood heaters is required by the Clean Air Act constitutes a violation of the law. This is a fundamental and strong legal argument that forms the core of their case. 2. Public health and environmental concerns. The complaint highlights the harmful pollutants present in the wood smoke, such as fine particle matter, PM 2.5, and their adverse impact on public health. By emphasizing the dangers associated with these pollutants, the plaintiffs underscore the urgency and necessity of updating more stringent NSPS to protect the environment and public well-being. 3. Ineffectiveness of current standards. The plaintiffs argue that the existing NSPS last updated in 2015, are outdated and ineffective in reducing harmful emissions from residential wood heaters. They reference deficiencies in the EPA's testing and certification program to support their claim that the current standards do not adequately ensure compliance and emission reduction. 4. Non-compliance with mandatory review timelines. The plaintiffs assert that the EPA has failed to comply with the mandatory 8-year review timeline stipulated in the Clean Air Act. This failure is presented as a clear violation of the non-discretionary duty, strengthening the legal foundation for their case. These merits form a persuasive argument that highlights the EPA's obligation to protect public health and the environment through timely updates to emission standards, particularly in light of scientific evidence demonstrating the harmful effects of wood smoke emissions. The combination of legal obligations, health concerns, environmental impacts, and inadequacy of current standards forms a strong case for the plaintiffs. Regarding the 10 states suing the EPA, what are the possible outcomes of this? The possible outcomes of this legal complaint will depend on various factors, including the strengths of the arguments presented by both parties, interpretation of relevant laws and regulations, and the court's decision. Here are some potential outcomes. Judgment in favor of the plaintiffs. The court may rule in favor of the plaintiffs, declaring that the EPA violated the Clean Air Act by not timely reviewing and revising the new source performance standard for residential wood heaters. The court could then issue an injunction compelling the EPA to expedite and review the proposed necessary revisions to the standards. 2. Dismissal of the complaint. The court may dismiss the complaint if it finds that the EPA's actions are in compliance with the Clean Air Act or if there are legal deficiencies in the plaintiff's arguments. 3. A negotiated settlement. The parties could reach a negotiated settlement before the court reaches a decision. The settlement might involve an agreement for a specific timeline for the EPA to review and revise the new source performance standards, potentially avoiding a prolonged legal battle. In my experience, this may be a confidential settlement. 4. Appeal. Regardless of the outcome, either party could choose to appeal the decision to a higher court if they believe there were errors in the legal process, misinterpretation of the law, or other grounds for appeal. Continued litigation. Number 5. If the case is not dismissed or settled, the litigation may proceed to a trial where both parties present evidence and the court will make a final decision based on the merits of the case. The final outcome will depend on the legal arguments, evidence presented, adherence to the law, and interpretation of the Clean Air Act and relevant regulations by the court. Regarding the 10 states suing the EPA, what is the most reasonable outcome of this? Predicting the precise outcome of a legal case is challenging. It is ultimately depends on a multitude of factors, including the strength of legal arguments, interpretation of the law, evidence presented, and the judge's decision. However, I can suggest a potential reasonable outcome based on the information provided and general legal principles. The most reasonable outcome could involve the court recognizing the validity of the plaintiff's concerns about the EPA's delay in reviewing and updating the new source performance standard for residential wood heaters. The court might issue an injunction requiring the EPA to expedite the review process and propose necessary revisions to the standards within a specified timeline aligned with the requirements of the Clean Air Act. This outcome would seek to balance the need for updated regulations to protect the public, health, and environment, as argued by the plaintiffs, with administrative processes and capacity like the EPA to fulfill its obligations under the law. It would encourage the EPA to take prompt action while considering practical constraints, ultimately aiming to achieve improved air quality standards for residential wood heaters in a reasonable and feasible manner. However, the outcome can vary based on specific legal arguments, interpretation of the law, and evidence presented during the proceedings. Legal decisions are ultimately determined by the court based on the merits of the case and adherence to the law. Smokeless Chimney, www.smokelesschimney.com.